Welcome to Spotlight on Schools. We focus on the Rochester City Schools. I'm your host, Jim Strauss. Today, I'm pleased to have on our program Van Henry White, President of the Rochester City School Board. Thank you for coming to Spotlight on Schools.
My pleasure.
Okay. You can read Van White's biography on the Rochester City School District website. Most people know that in addition to being a public servant, Van White is a lawyer. What I didn't know was that his first degree was in education and that he began his professional career as a teacher. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I went to SUNY at Albany, State University of New York at Albany. My undergraduate degree was in teaching. My area of specialty was social studies. And are you familiar with Troy, New York?
I know where it is.
Yeah. My student teaching assignment was in Troy, at Troy High School. And I successfully completed that. And then it was a tough assignment. They asked me to teach sub-Saharan Africa, which was an area that I did not know. My specialty was American government, so it was a bit odd that I got assigned that area, but I managed to see my way through it. But I knew ultimately that I wanted to be a lawyer, so to make my way through law school, I taught. I taught at private schools, I taught at DC public schools, and went to law school pretty much at night.
And that was at Georgetown?
I was at Georgetown Law School. So yeah, my career in teaching was short, but that's actually my professional background. My beginnings was in teaching in Albany. And during one summer, while working on my undergraduate degree, I worked for the Committee on Children and Families. There was a guy out of the Bronx, his name was Assemblyman Al Van, and I was assigned to work on the disproportionate placement of young African American boys in special education.
Yep.
That was a really intriguing topic for me. I look at that paper today that I submitted to the Assembly Committee, and it's still relevant. The same issues are still in place. And then when I went to law school at Georgetown, my 9-credit professional placement was in IEPs. So essentially my whole career has revolved around teaching. It wasn't by accident. I mean, I believe next to the great work of our great lawyers in this American society, Thurgood Marshall, my other heroes were teachers. And there's a real powerful historical integration of those two professions, as you know. Were it not for Brown versus Board of Education, I would not have gone to the schools that I went to, and I would not be the lawyer that I am. So a real blessing to have those two careers merge, because it is at that juncture that the civil rights of people in America come into play.
Okay. Well, let's go on a little further on your career. As a lawyer, Van White worked here in the district attorney's office, then joined Mayor William Johnson's team as Rochester's Special Counsel on Crime and Violence Initiatives in '94. He was known as the Crime Czar.
Yep.
After he left that position, he opened his own private law firm. In 2006, he made a successful run in the Rochester City School Board. Why at that point did you make that choice?
Well, there's the convergence of my career at City Hall with my career as a private lawyer. When I was working at City Hall, my portfolio was to design a comprehensive response to crime and violence, from intervention to interdiction. So rehab, late night basketball, all prevention programs, but locking the worst 10% of the community up, closing down drug houses. But during the course of that 4-year stint at City Hall, something extremely tragic happened and unforgettable happened in this community. Stephanie Givens was killed. Yep. And she was killed by another student. At the time I was at City Hall, but eventually, as you noted, I would leave City Hall and go work in private practice of law. And in the interim, the case which had been brought against the city school district had been dismissed. They had another attorney. So the family learned that I was leaving City Hall, and they said, would you represent us? And I decided to represent them, got the case overturned before the appellate division so that it had to be tried. And probably about 6 months later, while working out of the attic, because that's where I started my private law practice, of my home on Mulberry Street, we got $1 million judgment against the Rochester City School District. The problem was, I realized very quickly that obviously $1 million could not bring Stephanie back, nor could it change the struggles that teachers and students and families with respect to violence were having. I felt that the best way, I learned shortly after getting that verdict, which in many ways was unsatisfactory because it didn't change what the district practices. And as I said, it couldn't bring Stephanie back. So I said, well, rather than trying to do this through the courtroom, let me see if I can do this through the classroom or the boardroom. And so I decided to run for school board.
Okay. You served 2 terms as board vice president,
Yes, sir.
then was elected board president in 2014. Yep. Your bio says that since then, you and your colleagues have, and I'm quoting here, redefined the role of school board member, end of quote. What was the role before and how have you redefined it?
Well, the short answer is, in my observation, boards, not only in Rochester, the Board of Education in Rochester, but throughout this country, I served a 2-year stint as the chair of the Council for Urban Boards of Education. So I'm pretty familiar with what's going on in urban education throughout this country. And I was on the board of directors for NSBA. So
NSBA?
National School Boards Association. All right. So in those capacities, I was able to observe what happens. And generally speaking, boards are very passive. But if you're in Brighton or Riga or Pittsford, you can afford to put the thing on cruise control because you've got families and support systems and a culture of achievement that basically drives that vehicle forward. And if you've got a competent, effective superintendent, there's not much for the boards to do. Well, obviously, as you can see in the Rochester City School District, this thing cannot be put on cruise control. But we've done what other boards have done. We've sat on our hands and let superintendent upon superintendent come in, put his thumbprint or fingerprint, her fingerprint on some particular policy or initiative, and then after 3 years, average tenure of an urban superintendent is about 3 years, 2.5 years, they go, and then another superintendent comes. And the trajectory never increases for the district. The moral of this story is, what did Einstein say? If you keep on doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results, that's the nature of insanity. What I was not willing to do, and what my colleagues were not willing to do, is do what we always did. When I got sworn in at Number 50 School, our 4-year graduation cohort was 39%. That means only 39% of our kids from becoming freshmen graduated within 4 years. And that process of failure continued by the same governance structure. Boards of education, urban boards of education, Rochester City School District, we sat on our hands and let superintendent upon superintendent tell us what to do. The new one comes in, he changes the format or she changes the format. That wasn't working. Insanity meant we would continue to do that. I said, let's get off our heinies, let's get our hands on the table, and let's read the statute. Remember now, I'm a lawyer by trade. My point of reference is always the statute. If you look at the enabling statute, the statute that creates boards of education, the word policymaker is never used. Urban school boards are very, very powerful, but over the decades, we bought this bill of goods that said you just sit by and you let the superintendent tell you what to do. And it wasn't working. And I would say to people, if you can give me the evidence, again, I'm a lawyer, if you give me the evidence that what we were doing was working, I'll continue to do it. But with a 39% graduation rate, that's no evidence of success. So I looked at the statute and I said to my colleagues, what does this tell us we can do? It told us what we were to do is buy the books, hire the coaches, hire the teachers, everything that you can imagine. Of course, make sure that the money is there to support the schools. Decide the curriculum.
Decide the curriculum.
Absolutely. So people have this conception that boards just sit on their hands and not do anything. But if you read the statute, that's not what it says. And when you take our statutory charge, and then in addition, you look at our history of failure, in my mind, there was no reason for us to continue to sit on our hands. All hands need to be on deck in doing what the statute enabled, required that we do, and we weren't doing it.
All right, quite an answer. Hold on, we're going to come right back and talk more about somebody else's view of what the board's role ought to be. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Spotlight on Schools. We're talking with Van White, president of the Rochester City School Board. We were talking before about the role of the school board. I want to read you a quote. This is by Dan Lowengard, who was briefly the interim city school district superintendent until he had a stroke. But in August 16th, there was an article in the Democrat and Chronicle in which he said this about the role of a board of education. I'm quoting, "Boards should be focusing on finance and monitoring of results rather than trying to run the place. The board should be 30,000 feet above the ground, looking to monitor what's going on and handling the political stuff, not doing the day-to-day business." End of quote. His idea, I think, behind that is that they are not the professional educators. They hire the professional educators. How do you react to that quote?
Well, where has being 30,000 feet got the Rochester City School District, right? Again, when I started, got sworn in number 50 school, the school that I attended when I was a child, the 4-year cohort graduation rate was 39%. Now here it is 8 years later. There's been some struggle. You and your audience have perhaps witnessed it. The board becoming more sort of consistent with the enabling statute, the law that requires that we act this way. And where are we at now? We're above 50% now. That is, no one's going to break the cork on the wine and champagne and say, hey, we made it. But as my grandfather, who spent some time in the civil rights movement, he says, you know, thank God we're not where we need to be, but thank God we're not where we were. So under this new conception of board leadership, I think we've made some progress. More progress than we made when we did it being the passive, hey, listen, whatever you tell us to do, superintendent. Dan Loengard is an exceptional guy, committed public servant, and I was blessed to be able to know him. But Dan, like most superintendents, and it's regrettable that we weren't able to continue our relationship, because I think it would have been an exceptional relationship. But like most superintendents, it doesn't surprise me that Dan thought that we should be 30,000 feet above. But again, what did that get us? We weren't seeing what was going on. Now, I know you're going to get around to it. A perfect example of not being at 30,000, but maybe being at 30 feet. When I was attending, I'll keep it very brief, when I was attending a New York State championship basketball game somewhere in downstate New York, featured East High School. As I'm literally sitting there, I get a buzz off my cell phone, and it's Bolhan Vargas telling us, it's a copy of a letter from New York State telling us our largest high school, East High School, we had 6 weeks to choose between 5 options. Now, traditionally, the Board of Education said, okay, superintendent, you tell us what to do and we'll do it. My colleagues and I said, no, we're not doing it that way, because look what it got us. The largest high school, children of color, children of all backgrounds failing miserably because we're at 30,000 feet. We said, no, we're going to get to 30 feet. And what did I do? I literally called up Joanne Larson, a professor at U of R, who I knew through Freedom School, a non-for-profit organization. And I said, Joanne, one of our options, because I'm a lawyer, is to go to the statute. It's called an Educational Partnership Organization. And the Board of Education contract with an organization. Do you think the University of Rochester, which is a top-notch educational school, the Warner School, would be interested? Well, Joel Seligman, Joanne Larson, and Raphael Barassi, the dean of the Warner School, and Steve Eubing, a top-notch professor and a former superintendent.
Been on this program.
Right. He'll tell you the University of Rochester told me, no, we will not be your EPO 3 times. I didn't sit on my hands. I kept my hands on deck, and I kept on asking them. And Joel Seligman will tell you, eventually, they relented. We now have an unprecedented effort going on, showing significant progress. Nobody else has had this kind of progress. In fact, the state, I think, is really hoping, praying, based on the evidence they have, this is a worthy prayer, that this might be a model of urban transformation. If we had stayed at 30,000 feet, like Dan and many other experienced, committed educators had done, that would have never happened. You know what would have happened? We would have shuffled the walnuts and moved things around, different name, called it something else, and it has still been a miserable failure. Now we have something unique. We have the #1 employer in this region running our schools. And you know what? It's not a lot of people think, oh, they're an independent organization. You know who they are? They're a superintendent. They report to the Board of Education. Now our superintendent has all the other schools, but the University of Rochester, with a guy by the name of Dr. Sean Nelms, is the superintendent of East High School. They report directly to the Board of Education. And the preliminary results are fantastic. That's because we said we're not operating at 30,000 feet, we're operating at 30 feet.
The preliminary results, they reported them recently. The preliminary results in the lower school have been pretty good. They've been sort of iffy in the upper school. Sure. There's been some other non-tangible or less tangible results, particularly in the reduction of the suspension rate is one thing, but that's different. And we'll get to that a little bit later.
Okay.
I want to talk about in the last election cycle, the Democrat and Chronicle has been critical of the district at a lot of levels. But in the last election cycle, in the Democratic primaries, and if you're a Democrat, you're going to get elected. If you're Republican, you're not.
Pretty much.
The Democrat and Chronicle refused to endorse any of the incumbents who were running, and their basic premise was that the board had been ineffective in managing the schools, and that new blood should be encouraged to come in and try their hand. All the incumbents were reelected. But how did you react to the newspaper's position?
Well, I don't need to repeat my answer that I just gave you 2 minutes ago,
Right.
which was essentially they were right to a certain extent. Boards in the past were ineffective, but that's because they followed the traditional party line, which is, okay, superintendent, we're going to sit on our hands and you tell us what to do. You want us to have a K through 12, a K through 6 configuration? Yep. Next superintendent comes in. You want to do K through 8 configuration? Board of Education sits on their hands and says, yep. Not providing the statutory guidance that the statute requires. Instead, we said, we're going to do something different. Now, what's the evidence that doing this thing a little bit different? What's the evidence? We have a large urban district, and we've increased our graduation rate by 11, 12 percentage points. We've done what no other district has done successfully, at least the data suggests it's moving in the right direction, brought in an EPO. Now, let me just explain to you, it's not a passive role, and I assume it's very frustrating, but the Democrat and Chronicle can't say, oh, well, you've been doing the same thing, you've been ineffective. We've done what nobody else has done, created an EPO at the secondary level. I call it an incubator of success. We're taking best practices that the University of Rochester is developing at East High School and emulating them in other secondary schools. You're aware that we recently announced, the Board of Education did this, not the superintendent. I called up somebody at Geneseo who I knew, and I said, would you be interested in helping us establish an EPO at the elementary level? So we now have what I call sibling EPOs, so that there will be incubators of success looking at best practices at secondary level at East High School, run by the U of R, and SUNY Geneseo. Different schools, by the way. The SUNY Geneseo school, if this thing comes through after a year's worth of planning, we anticipate that it will be a teacher-led school. So it's a totally different model. East High School is a community school. This is likely to be a teacher-led school. But in any event, incubators of success that other district schools can emulate. That happens because the Board of Education said, we have been ineffective, we're going to try something different. And again, a lot of people respect Einstein, and I think a lot of people respect that definition. If you continue to do the same thing over and over again, and you expect different results, that's the nature of insanity. We weren't going to do what the Democrat and Chronicle had correctly observed, which is to do the same thing and continue to be ineffective. We've done something dramatically different, much to the chagrin of, ironically, the Democrat and Chronicle and some superintendents, but it is producing unique programs. I'm talking about a military academy.
Yes, and we'll get to that. But
right.
let's hold. We'll come back and we'll talk about that after we come back. We're talking about the concept of charter schools and magnet schools. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Spotlight on Schools. We're talking with Van White, the president of the Rochester City School Board. In April, Mayor Lovely Warren began expressing an interest in the city acting as overseer of what she called a receivership district for failing schools that may be coming up. The last three that were in danger have been rescued, at least for now. No. Her main argument was that it would be better for there to be one guiding strategy than for each school to have a different receiver. An article in the Democrat and Chronicle suggested there could be 2 schools in that category next year, 10 the following year, and 14 the next. Now, such a move would require a change in state ed law, but what's your reaction to her proposal?
Well, my immediate reaction was, again, my frame of reference is a lawyer. The statute wouldn't have allowed it. First of all, I don't know who she was referring to as a receiver, but in order to be a receiver, you have to have some expertise in transforming urban districts. And I don't know if she was proposing that the city do it, but there was certainly no one on the city payroll that had that kind of expertise. To be fair to her, there are very few companies or individuals that have the successful experience in transforming an urban district. Save one, Rochester, New York. We're doing it at East High School. I know we're going to do it at number 19 with SUNY Geneseo. So, and the evidence is, again, my frame of reference is, what's the progress that we've made? What kinds of things are we doing? Do we have a strategy? I said to you earlier on, secondary EPO, incubator of success, sister or sibling EPO at the elementary school level, an incubator of success. We have other strategies in place. The mayor is, it's not that she's not involved, she is, and we're thankful for that.
Oh, she
the
is.
Beacon School at
More
number
so.
17. She's involved in reading. Typically in schools we talk about getting A's, B's, and C's, I focus on C's. I don't care if you're the superintendent or the mayor, you have to collaborate, you have to communicate, you have to connect with people. The reality is no one person, there's no Superman, to steal the movie. There's no one Superman or Superwoman that can do this. You have to do this as a collective. If you look at what we did at East High School, we partnered not only with the largest employer, respected educational institution, but community groups from across this community. So the model can't be one receiver coming in, ripping open his shirt and saying, I'm super receiver. It doesn't work like that. The Board of Education is committed to coming up with collaboratives that recognize that the superintendent and the Board of Education have to work as a team. The mayor has to work in a team. If one person is rowing the boat and it's only one person, you're going to go in circles. Everybody's got to take an oar, all hands on deck, and through that kind of cooperation and collaboration and timed, communicated rowing, we'll get to the other side. One individual cannot do this. So everything we do, our strategy is to work together as a team. No one person can save this district. And that's been the problem in the past. We expected one superintendent to do it, and it didn't work.
Okay. One of her suggestions, though, is that some of these failing schools be converted into charter schools. Recent standardized test results show that charter schools are now outperforming most schools in the city at the elementary level. And in fact, some of these charter schools are outperforming suburban schools. I don't know if you saw that article. It was pretty surprising to me. For the first time, we're starting to see that kind of data. The Democrat and Chronicle has been highly critical of the district for not trying to learn more from the charter movement. I'm sure you've read that too.
I did.
A September 16th editorial said this, and I quote, "Current board president Van White held a best practices summit last year, inviting charters to participate, and he has started meeting with some charter school officials. There is movement, but it is slow." Can you comment on that?
Well, I think that's accurate. It's not as fast as I and perhaps others would like it to be. But if you move too fast, I'm not convinced that moving fast is the goal. I think you should move as we did with East High School in a deliberative, planned way to make sure that what you're doing engages everybody at every level, from parent to teacher. And so, yeah, the progress on getting our conversations and programs with charter schools is a little slow, but I can talk to you about the military academy, I can talk about East High School.
I want to get to that.
I got to talk about Geneseo, but let me tell you, there is a school, and I'm not going to name them right now, a charter school. And the conversations right now are a very successful charter school. I think they graduate in excess of 84% of their kids on time, right? There's a conversation right now. It's taking time, just like it did with the U of R. Remember, Joel Seligman told us no 4 times, and eventually he said yes. There's a conversation going on right now with a charter school that graduates 84% of their kids on time, and the conversation is this. Let's create a conversion charter, a charter run by the district, but would be managed by the person that is running this charter. It would be the same charter school, but it would become under the supervision of the district. So I get people are impatient every year that progress doesn't happen. That's a child who doesn't flip his tassel. But in order to ensure that children and families are successful, we must be deliberative, we must be patient in our planning, because that's where success comes from.
Okay, what do you think that a district such as the Rochester City School District can learn from the charter school movement?
Well, I wish we had more time, because I would tell you.
We don't have much.
I get that. Let me just say, the reality is there's a hemorrhaging going on in this district.
Yes,
the
there is.
parents who want their kids to succeed, the engaged parents, the parents who want something better, the parent who's likely to push the teacher who's not providing the kind of work that their child needs, or push the principal to offer AP courses. Those parents are leaving. They're going to parochial schools, they're going to charter schools. So let's keep it real, as the kids would say. These charter schools are getting a population of students that are ready to be successful. They're leaving our district. And that's why I say the strategy is create schools that parents and kids want to go to, so that we don't see the yellow school buses come down the street when they reach middle school, so we don't see the for sale signs. That's what we have to do. We have to create the kind of schools that the charter schools are creating. And let's also keep it real. The charter schools are not keeping the kids who have the greatest challenges. Let's be honest about this. They're not keeping the behavioral kids. We have a mandate, a constitutional mandate to educate all children.
Yep.
They don't have that mandate. And in addition, we got some great teachers in this district, but we have to operate under collective bargaining laws that make us, so it's apples and oranges. It's not apples and oranges, it's apples and melons to compare the charters to the district, because the rules are totally different. They don't operate by the same rules that we do.
You did talk about, or it did talk about a best practices summit. I'm assuming that was fruitful.
It was. That's where the conversation about having that successful charter school come over to the district that's where that conversation began.
Okay, we need to move on to another thing. And this is closer to your heart. And
All
this
right.
is something called a magnet school. One proposed solution to the concentrated poverty and the segregation issues is a magnet school that would draw from both the city and the county. We have an urban-suburban program. You have supported that in the past. But basically, those are kids, mostly minority students from the city going out to suburban schools. A magnet school would be made up of both minority students and people from the suburbs coming together. One of yours that you supported is a military school. Tell briefly, we have very little time left.
Well, literally, it's like a magnet. Whether you're black, white, rich, poor, there's a segment in your community that probably has families that feel that a military academy would be appropriate for their child. Again, I'm not making the decision. I didn't go to military academy when I was a kid, but there's a parent out there, and he or she is black, white, Latino, rich, poor. And the idea is to create such a school, this is just an idea at this particular time, that might attract the interest of people from across this community. And the logic from good organizations like Great Schools for All suggests, and the research suggests, that if you have a better balance of socioeconomic groups in a school, the more likely those children will be successful. How do you get that balance? You create a model that people, black, white, rich, and poor, want to go to. The military academy is potentially that kind of magnet. And again, I use this idea, we're hemorrhaging our best and brightest students and parents. And they are black and white and rich and poor, and they're going to these charter schools. I'm saying, why don't we have the gall to say, we're going to create the kind of market conditions that will make people say, we're going to come to the city. Again, if we stayed at 30,000 feet and waited for somebody to tell us to do that, somebody come and swoop down with a cape, it would never happen. The Board of Education said, we're going to contemplate those kinds of ideas that would attract those kinds of parents into our community. We had the audacity to believe that we could bring students, black, white, rich, and poor, to our district, not just say, the only way we can save city kids is to have them go out to Brighton and Pittsford and Riker. No, we can do it here in Rochester.
Great Schools for All. I met you there. Their member, one of their members, Don Pryor, said this in a city paper article. There is no way that the city school district can fix itself because of the demographics. I don't know if you remember that quote. What he's suggesting is it begins with magnet schools to begin to deconcentrate poverty. How do you feel about that quote?
Well, it's not just through magnet schools. I think that's one way to do it, and I think that the military academy is an example of that. But I think, for example, the military academy and East High School got the #1 employer in this region, and they're graduating kids from the high school that they manage. What are the possibilities for a child who goes through East High School and become a doctor, get into college? That's a magnet. It may not be your traditional magnet school, but that's a magnet. SUNY Geneseo, top-notch teachers that teach throughout this region are coming out of SUNY Geneseo. What's the opportunity that's available for a child like that? So it's not just a military academy.
No.
It's all kinds of models. And again, I believe that the Rochester School District and all of its partners can do that together.
Okay. Well, we're out of time. I want to thank you so much.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
For joining me. All right, we've been talking with Van White, president of the Rochester City School Board. Now, you can see this and other episodes of Spotlight on School on our website at spotlightonschoolsblog.wordpress.com or on our YouTube channel at Spotlight on Schools Rochester. Thank you for watching. Good night.